Welcome to the deep dive. We've gathered quite a stack of sources this time. We're talking historical biographies, deep dives into finance, investigative pieces on political networks. And, looking through them, there's this really clear common thread, isn't there?
Absolutely. It's the mechanics, how modern elites get and then keep these incredible levels of wealth and power, and crucially, how they often seem to operate, well, outside the usual rules, the accountability systems that apply to most people.
Yeah, completely outside.
So we're synthesizing across different fields, tech, finance, industry, politics. It's not just about individual success stories. We're trying to dissect the underlying architectures, the systems that let these tycoons, historical and modern, build fortunes that are almost untouchable.
So our mission today is really to unpack the specifics, some surprising facts, actually, about how this wealth gets generated, how it's turned into systemic power, and how it often gets shielded from any real oversight. By the end of this deep dive, you should have a much clearer picture, a really informed view of the playbook used by the global super-rich. Let's kick off right at the beginning. How is this kind of wealth actually engineered? How does it build on itself?
Okay, so the first big thing to grasp is the difference between earning a wage, day-to-day income, and building dynastic wealth. Andrew Carnegie's early career. It's a perfect illustration. We picture him as this, relentless industrialist.
Right, forging steel, building empire.
Exactly. But the sources show his path to serious wealth wasn't really paved by his salary. Not at all.
That distinction is so important because the records show even when he was working for the Pennsylvania Railroad, young guy, mid-20s, he was already doing things differently, wasn't he? Taking long trips, trusting partners back home.
Totally confident they could handle it. Why? Because the money wasn't tied just to his presence. It kept coming in.
Okay, so what was the actual breakdown? His salary versus everything else?
Well, his salary from the railroad was $2,400 a year.
Which sounds okay for back then, maybe?
It does, but here's the kicker. That was only about 5% of his total income at the time.
Wow, only 5%.
Yeah, the other 95%. That was dividends, interest payments, returns on investments he'd already made.
So it's wealth from owning things, from capital, not from his actual job description.
Precisely. Wealth derived from capital ownership, not labor. He was functioning as a capital owner even while technically being an employee, an executive.
And what's really fascinating is how quickly the story, the mythology gets built around this reality.
Oh, absolutely. He had to square that reality living off passive income with the American ideal of the hardworking man.
Yeah, the self-made man narrative.
So he constantly pushed this idea that he was a fellow workman, an active partner in the ventures, even when, the reality was he was often managing his investments from a library in New York or on a ship to Europe, living entirely off those dividends.
So the myth of the laborer magnate was crucial. It kind of masks the real structural shift happening underneath. He got rich because he owned capital that made more capital.
Exactly. And that basic model, accumulating wealth through ownership, often in protected or structured ways, rather than pure competitive innovation, you see it scale up globally, especially where competition is, let's say, deliberately limited.
Which brings us to this idea of the modern rentier system. Our sources talk about this quite a bit, sometimes using tycoons like Robert Cook in Asia as an example.
Yeah, the term rentier system is key. It essentially means making money from owning an asset, where that asset's value or income stream is somehow protected, maybe artificially inflated. In what some sources call the Asian Godfather model, the core wealth often comes from securing cash flows from, unfree markets.
Unfree markets meaning?
Meaning markets where competition is restricted, often through getting exclusive licenses, monopolies, or oligopolies, concessions directly from the government.
Got it. So the profit isn't necessarily because you're the best or most efficient, but because you have the right to operate without facing full competition.
Exactly. It's state-enforced limits. And the sources point out this isn't entirely new. It kind of echoes how colonial powers used to carve up economic rights. Access and control were the currency, more than innovation.
And Robert Cook is cited as someone who really modernized this in Southeast Asia, leveraging connections, getting those concessions to secure his business turf.
He did. Now, what's really mind-bending is applying this rentier idea to the future, specifically to AI. The prediction in some of our sources is that AI could create similar monopolistic dynamics across dozens of industries. A new kind of corporate oligarchy emerges, extracting systemic rent from controlling information and automation.
Okay, but wouldn't antitrust laws kick in?
Yeah.
In the U.S., for example.
Well, that's the potential conundrum. Antitrust usually hinges on proving consumer harm, higher prices, lower quality, that sort of thing.
Right.
But what if an AI monopoly, because of its massive scale and efficiency, actually delivers a better service, maybe even cheaper?
So if the service is objectively good for the consumer, even if one company controls everything.
The legal argument for breaking it up based on consumer harm gets really difficult, maybe impossible. Even if the concentration of power is staggering, it's a potential structural loophole for the next wave of tech titans.
Fascinating. So from protected markets to the sheer physics of finance, let's talk high-frequency trading, HFT, another way to gain an edge.
Yeah, the theme shifts from licenses to speed, pure, raw speed.
Okay, let's unpack this. Speed and complexity in finance. The sources say the stock market isn't really one market anymore.
Not really. It's more like a collection of small markets, scattered geographically across different data centers. And in that fragmented, super fast, algorithmic world, we're talking tiny fractions of time. A millisecond difference. That's literally the difference between making a trade and the market vanishing before your order gets there.
A millisecond, that's hard to even conceive of.
It is. And the edge comes from something called co-location.
Co-location, okay.
It's not about brilliant strategy. It's about physical placement. HFT firms pay huge sums to put their computer servers in the same building, sometimes the same room, as the stock exchange's main matching engine.
Why does that matter so much?
Physics. Light speed, basically. It means they get the market data, the buy and sell orders, a tiny fraction of a second before it travels through fiber optic cables to everyone else, even someone just down the street.
And that tiny lead lets them
See the incoming orders and trade ahead of them. Perfectly legally under the current structure. It's called front-running, essentially enabled by infrastructure access.
I remember one source mentioned an investigator, Ronan, who talked about how shocked traditional big investors were when they realized this was happening. They didn't even know.
Exactly. And the system was kind of built to allow it because of, well, massive conflicts of interest.
How so?
The brokers, the people routing your trades, they were often getting paid by the exchanges to send orders to these specific co-located venues.
So the broker gets a kickback.
And the exchanges themselves, they were raking in billions a year from the HFT firms for that faster data access and prime server real estate.
So the whole setup prioritized the intermediary's profits, the rent from being physically close, over a fair market for everyone else.
Pretty much. The architecture itself created the inequality.
And when you remove even those flimsy constraints, you get something like the FTX and Alameda research meltdown.
Right. The FTX situation, according to the sources, was built on just an astonishing lack of, well, adult supervision. Alameda Research, which was Sam Bankman-Fried's private trading fund.
SBF, yeah.
Yeah. It was systematically and secretly borrowing customer money directly from the FTX exchange.
Billions, right?
At least $8 billion of crypto traders' money. Money that should have been totally separate, totally safe. It was just funneled into Alameda for its own super risky bets.
How could that even happen structurally?
This is the craziest part. The investigation found there was literally a button on FTX, some kind of software backdoor, that essentially allowed Alameda to bypass all the normal risk checks and margin requirements.
The do whatever you want button.
Effectively, yes. It let Alameda take unlimited risk, ultimately costing customers billions when it all imploded.
And this was possible because of the speed and complexity.
That and the sheer lack of oversight. SBF apparently deployed something like $5 billion into various investments over just 3 years. That's a major decision almost every few days. There was no real board of directors looking over his shoulder, no proper accounting, nobody, not even his closest circle, who actually understood the whole tangled mess.
Because in his mind, it was his fund, his money, even if it came from customers.
The sources suggest that was the attitude. If it's in Alameda, why shouldn't he do whatever he wants with it? That personal conviction, combined with deliberately opaque structures, enabled the whole disaster.
So it's not speed, it's scale. Leveraging data, market position, the tech giants. Let's look at Microsoft under Gates.
Yeah, Gates showed that aggressive, almost preemptive dominance from very early on. There's an example where Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, a competitor back then, started moving into Microsoft's territory, the market for programming languages.
Okay, so a competitor makes a move.
Gates' reaction was instant and pretty aggressive. He immediately licensed UNIX from AT&T, a rival operating system, and started selling it as XENX.
To compete directly with DEC's core business.
Exactly. His stated reason was blunt. When they came into our market, we went after their market. The message was crystal clear. Compete with us, and we will come after you hard. No coexistence.
Amazon used a similar playbook, but maybe more focused on data leverage.
Definitely. Bezos had this unwavering vision, the store that sold everything. And early on, he positioned Amazon as like a lifeline for book publishers.
Right, they were struggling against the big physical bookstores, the superstores.
Yeah, so publishers saw Amazon as an ally, a new channel. But Bezos, behind the scenes, was constantly pushing them, haranguing publishers for more metadata.
Metadata being.
All the extra info, jacket summaries, author bios, reviews, crucially, their internal sales data.
Ah, the sales data.
Amazon hoovered all that up, used it to build its own understanding of the market, enhance its search, personalize recommendations.
And eventually use that dominance against the publishers themselves.
That's what the sources suggest. They turned from partners into dependent suppliers, locked into Amazon's ecosystem. The initial savior narrative was cover for achieving total information and market control.
Okay, so we've seen the structural ways wealth is built. But these massive fortunes, they don't just run themselves. They seem to rely heavily on the personality, the persona of the tycoon at the top.
Absolutely. The persona is critical. It's often deliberately crafted, sometimes full of contradictions, and it allows them to operate outside normal corporate or social boundaries.
Like Henry Ford.
Perfect example. Ford meticulously cultivated this image of himself as, like, a simple country boy at heart. He was always praising rural life, saying the farmer lives amid conditions that make for sanity of mind.
Which must have played really well with a certain segment of America back then.
Hugely well. It made this incredibly powerful industrialist seem grounded, relatable, and it distracted, maybe deliberately, from the often brutal realities of his assembly lines and his management style. The mythology was a shield.
Sam Walton and Walmart used a similar kind of folksy contradiction, didn't he? The sources make a distinction.
They do. They talk about his promoter personality versus his operator soul.
The promoter being.
That's the guy doing donkey rides at store openings, embracing comparisons to P.T. Barnum, the showman. Fun, maybe a bit goofy. But underneath that, hidden by it, was the soul of an operator. Deeply focused, relentless about efficiency, logistics, making every single thing the best they possibly can.
Then Walton himself admitted this is strategic.
He did. He said the public perception of Walmart as just some small-time, maybe slightly disorganized regional player, that misunderstanding was a huge advantage. It let them fly under everybody's radar until we were too far along to catch.
The goofy persona bought time for ruthless expansion.
Exactly.
And then there's Steve Jobs. Genius, absolutely. But the sources paint a picture of, well, pathological negotiation tactics.
Yeah, his reputation is this weird mix. Undeniable genius, but also incredibly ruthless when it came to control and getting his way.
Like agreeing to deals that just evaporate.
He was notorious for it. Shake hands on something, agree verbally, and then just let it never happen. No follow-through, no explanation. One person quoted described him as both pathological and a genius in the same breath. Because the behavior wasn't just tough business, it seemed to cross into personal manipulation, ignoring commitments entirely.
And he used that ambiguity strategically, right? Like when Ellison was talking about a takeover of Apple.
Oh, definitely. Jobs wasn't officially back in charge yet. Larry Ellison, his friend, publicly floats the idea of a hostile takeover. What does Jobs tell the current CEO, Gil Amelio? He stays totally vague, non-committal, says he doesn't really get what Ellison's up to.
Knowing full well it would cause chaos.
Of course. By not shutting down the speculation, he fueled the uncertainty, the pressure on Amelio, which ultimately helped pave the way for his own return to power. Masterful manipulation. And alongside the persona, there's often this management style built on stress, on division. It's about maintaining absolute personal control.
Preventing anyone else from getting too powerful within the organization.
Precisely. Henry Ford's approach here was, frankly, pretty toxic according to the sources.
What did he do?
He used this divide and conquer tactic, deliberately setting his most trusted lieutenant, a guy named Charles Sorensen, against his own son, Edsel Ford.
His son and heir.
Yeah.
Why?
Ford claimed it was to toughen up Edsel, make him stronger. But the real effect, it constantly reinforced Henry's ultimate authority. Everyone knew Sorensen could, and often would, go around Edsel straight to Henry for big decisions. It undermined Edsel completely, kept him insecure, and made sure Henry was the only one with unquestioned power. The internal stress was a management tool.
Chilling. And you see echoes of that kind of ruthlessness, maybe translated differently, in the modern gig economy. Travis Kalanick at Uber.
Yeah, Kalanick's model at Uber is a clear modern parallel in terms of operational control versus responsibility. The whole business was structured around minimizing Uber's own responsibility by classifying drivers as 1099 independent contractors, not employees.
Which meant Uber didn't have to cover.
Benefits, vehicle costs, gas, insurance, all that fell on the driver. And the sources are stark. Kalanick showed no sympathy for drivers and their bills.
Zero sympathy.
Yeah, that's the description. Whether it was maintenance, gas prices shooting up, health issues, that wasn't Uber's problem. The profit model was built on pushing those costs onto the individual driver. Transactional ruthlessness.
And in a totally different field, pharmaceuticals, Richard Sackler at Purdue showed how you can maintain that intense personal control even after formally stepping down.
Right. Sackler officially gave up the president title at Purdue in 2003, but the sources are clear. He stayed intimately involved in everything related to OxyContin, day-to-day operations.
So the title didn't matter.
Didn't matter at all. Other executives were apparently complaining internally, things like, Dr. Richard has to back off. But his personal focus on driving OxyContin sales remained absolute. It created this constant pressure cooker environment, always focused on hitting those sales targets, regardless of his official role.
It seems a core element enabling all this is secrecy. Opacity, making it hard to track the money or hold anyone accountable. We saw that with SBF.
Absolutely central to the SBF story. That $5 billion deployed so fast, with no real board, no checks and balances. That wasn't an accident. It was a system built on personal trust, or rather SBF's sole control, instead of institutional oversight.
And his justification was?
In his mind, apparently, since Alameda was his private fund, why shouldn't Sam be able to do with it whatever he pleased? That mindset, combined with the opaque structure, is what allowed things to unravel so quickly.
This isn't new.
Yeah.
Go back to the 80s, the insider trading scandals.
Yeah.
Drexel, Burnham, Lambert. They were defiant, too, weren't they?
Oh, completely defiant. When the SEC came knocking, Drexel initially just refused to cooperate. Their lawyers basically attacked the government's star witness, Ivan Bogesky, calling him a liar, trying to discredit him.
Even when the SEC warned them.
Yeah, even when the SEC lawyers told Drexel's lawyers flat out, look, the case against your top guy, Michael Milken, is overwhelming. You need to start cooperating now.
And they still resisted.
They did. Their final act of defiance, or maybe just arrogance, was trying to explain away this mysterious $5.3 million payment found on their books with some totally baffling, nonsensical story. It just angered the regulators even more and showed a complete contempt for the process.
Okay, so if money buys speed in markets and control in companies, it follows it can buy influence in politics too, shaping the very rules these tycoons operate under. Our sources really go deep on the scale of modern political influence, especially the Koch network.
Yeah, the Koch strategy described in the sources isn't just basic lobbying. It's about building an entire parallel political infrastructure. The methodology outlined involves using, and the sources use these words, stealth, subterfuge, and even adopting tactics they apparently admired in communists, like manipulation and dishonesty, to push their own very different radical vision.
And they didn't just walk into Congress and ask for things.
No, it was much more systemic. They created this whole network, an alphabet soup of front groups, often with very bland, harmless-sounding names.
Like Train or TACTIP.
Exactly. TRAIN stood for To Restore American Independence Now. TACT was Truth About Civil Turmoil. Sounds reasonable, right?
Mundane, almost.
But behind these slogans, these groups were pushing quite radical agendas for deregulation, shrinking government. The key was masking the centralized funding and the unified radical vision behind this appearance of grassroots activism.
And the scale grew enormously.
To the point where, by around 2012, the sources described the Koch network as becoming a rival center of power to the Republican establishment itself.
Wow, how did they achieve that scale?
Through building this incredibly sophisticated political assembly line, a coordinated machine.
An assembly line for politics.
Kinda, yeah. It deployed millions strategically to very specific groups. They had the Libre Initiative targeting Latino voters, Generation Opportunity aimed at millennials, various think tanks, academic funding arms.
All pushing the same core message.
Generally, yes, and all coordinated efficiently. They even had a central administrative hub, the Center for Shared Services, handling the back-end stuff for all these different groups, managing millions and spending smoothly.
It's a striking example of capital essentially buying political infrastructure, isn't it? Allowing a few wealthy individuals to build what amounts to a shadow political party.
That's a good way to put it. It allows for disproportionate influence on national policy.
Now, this transactional view of influence, it's not exactly new. Andrew Carnegie, back in his day, was also pretty adept at political maneuvering for his own goals.
Oh, Carnegie was a master, especially when it came to his big passion projects like international peace and arbitration treaties. And he showed, let's say, a remarkable lack of fixed loyalty to politicians themselves. It was about the policy.
How so?
Well, there's an instance where he'd spent a whole year basically coaching President Theodore Roosevelt for a big peace initiative, which then fizzled out. But then in 1910, Roosevelt's successor, President Taft, makes some positive remarks about arbitration. Instantly, Carnegie pivots.
Drops Roosevelt.
Completely. Starts showering Taft with outlandish praise, calls him the father of peace on earth. He just switched partners happily, ruthlessly, to whoever he thought could advance his specific agenda at that moment. Influence was purely a tool.
Beyond building political machines, there's also the effort to influence regulatory bodies, academia, blurring the lines between independent thought and sponsored ideology.
Yes, the influence in academia, particularly concerning the Koch funding, is a major point of contention in the sources. Critics argue that some courses, and even entire programs set up with this funding, don't really meet normal standards of scholarship. They function more like, well, indoctrination centers for a specific economic worldview.
One professor was quoted saying you can basically buy academic areas now.
Yeah, bought just like politicians was the quote. The concern is that the money shapes the research questions, maybe even the conclusions, and ends up limiting genuine academic debate instead of encouraging it.
And historically, that revolving door between high finance and government power was just as present, the House of Morgan.
Oh, incredibly close ties to the White House. There's a great example from 1931. Europe's finances are on the brink of collapse. Thomas Lamont, a top Morgan partner, just picks up the phone and calls President Hoover directly
Could suggest.
to propose an immediate moratorium, a holiday, on all war debts and reparations payments between nations, a huge policy shift.
And Hoover's reaction.
Hoover was apparently a bit irritated. Sitting in Washington, he tells Lamont, sitting in New York essentially, you have no idea what people outside Wall Street think,
Right?
but Lamont's warning about a potential European crash carried immense weight. Hoover ultimately went along with the proposal. It shows the incredible implicit power these big financial players had to shape global policy.
In markets that are less developed, or unfree, as we discussed, the influence can be even more direct, maybe focused on gaming the regulations themselves. Dhirubhai Ambani in India.
Ambani's company, Reliance, showed an extraordinary knack for, let's say, anticipating government actions. There's one case where they opened massive, irrevocable letters of credit to import 114,000 tons of PTA, a key raw material for polyester.
Okay, a huge order.
A huge order, placed just hours before the Indian government suddenly announced a major change in import policy. A change that would have made importing PTA much harder or more expensive for everyone else.
Now, they locked in their supply just before the rules changed.
Exactly. Ensuring their production could continue smoothly while competitors were potentially scrambling. It suggests incredible foresight, or perhaps incredible access.
And if they did face regulatory challenges, like customs disputes,
They weaponized the legal system. The sources describe how Reliance's lawyers could successfully tie up customs cases and appeals and procedural knots for literally a decade or more. Yeah. Delaying any final judgment indefinitely, it demonstrates how wealth can effectively buy immunity from timely enforcement just by overwhelming the system with complexity and appeals. Now, for the ultimate blend of wealth, state power, and corporate action, you really have to look at Russia under Putin. The state itself becomes an active player, often a weapon in corporate battles, usually to benefit state-aligned companies or individuals.
Putin had strong views on this early on, right?
Yeah.
About the state needing to control natural resources.
Yes, he believed the state had to reassert control, stop the chaotic pilfering of Russia's natural wealth that happened in the 90s. He argued these resources, oil, gas, minerals, were crucial. They would prop up the entire Russian economy for decades, but only if the state managed their exploitation firmly.
And we saw that power used very directly against foreign companies, like Shell.
Oh, absolutely. Royal Dutch Shell had this massive oil and gas project, Sakhalin II. They admitted to huge cost overruns. Putin's response. First, he publicly humiliates Shell's CEO during a state visit, just dresses him down in front of everyone.
Public shaming is step one.
Step 2. The Kremlin unleashes its environmental watchdog agency, run by a guy named Oleg Mitful. Suddenly, this agency, which hadn't seemed too concerned before, starts threatening criminal cases against Shell for supposed environmental violations. They floated fines up to $50 billion.
50 billion, that's existential.
Exactly. It was clearly regulatory power being used as a club. The goal wasn't environmental protection. It was to force Shell back to the negotiating table and make them give a controlling stake in the project to Russia's state-owned gas company, Gazprom, on much worse terms for Shell.
So corporate warfare using state regulatory bodies.
Precisely. And this whole system where fortunes were made incredibly fast through political connections, state contracts, it created a lot of bitterness among ordinary Russians. You had figures like Yelena Baturina, the wife of Moscow's powerful mayor, Lushkov. She becomes Russia's first female billionaire, largely by winning city contract after city contract.
Which the public saw as
Not as legitimate entrepreneurship, but as blatant corruption. Proof that the new capitalism was rigged, benefiting only the connected few while millions remained poor. It fueled deep resentment.
All right, so wealth and power are amassed using these structures and tactics. The final piece seems to be ensuring that if accountability ever does loom, it can be managed, deflected, or just outright defeated. And often this starts with failures built right into the system itself. Internal and external oversight mechanisms that just don't work.
Yeah, back to finance for a second. Those conflicts of interest we talked about, they're fundamental. They undermine oversight from the start. Brokers get paid by exchanges to send orders their way. Exchanges get paid by HFT firms for providing faster data. The incentives for the intermediaries are often directly opposed to ensuring a fair, transparent market for the end investor. The profit motive works against accountability.
And even when data is reported, it's often misleading. Gamed.
Actively gamed. The sources describe how exchanges will bundle lots of small individual trades together and report them as one single large block trade.
Like reporting 26 small trades as one big 15,000 share transaction.
Exactly. Why? It makes their performance stats look better. It inflates the average trade size, makes the market look more liquid and institutional than it might actually be. It's manipulating the metrics.
And dark pools. The private trading venues run by banks.
That's the ultimate black box. Since only the bank running the pool really knows what goes on inside, they all publish their own statistics showing how great they are. And surprise, surprise, they all somehow rank themselves #1 on execution quality.
They can't all be number one.
Of course not. As one investigator put it, the industry overglorifies data because data is so easy to game and the true data is so hard to obtain. Meaningful external comparison or accountability, almost impossible.
Shifting gears, the pharmaceutical industry found its own ways to bypass scrutiny. Purdue, Pharma, and OxyContin.
Purdue's marketing strategy for OxyContin was built on what the sources term empirical circularity. It's a fascinating and devastating concept.
Empirical circularity, meaning what?
It means Purdue convinced doctors that OxyContin wasn't dangerously addictive by using studies, articles, and opinions from other doctors.
Who were being paid by Purdue.
Exactly. Paid consultants, speakers, researchers funded by Purdue. Key opinion leaders in the pain management field, like Dr. Russell Portnoy, sometimes called the King of Pain, held prestigious academic positions while also having extensive financial ties to the company.
So it created this closed loop of information. Purdue funds the research says the drug is safe. Purdue uses that research to market the drug.
Which generates more sales, allowing Purdue to fund more research. It looks like independent science, but it's a self-referential system designed to validate the product and shield the company from genuine external scrutiny about the drug's real risks. They effectively monetize conflicts of interest on a massive scale. Beyond gaming the system, there's the sheer power of narrative control, shaping the story, silencing dissent.
Roger Ailes at Fox News seems like the modern master of this.
Absolutely. His management style, as described, was built on fear and loyalty. He personally ran strategy meetings twice a day. His focus was often on finding or amplifying conflict. Saddam Hussein was a recurring example to create these simple, powerful, ready-made narratives. Keep the audience engaged, keep them angry or afraid, keep them watching.
He was totally confident in this model.
Utterly convinced. Believed Fox News would crush CNN and be dominant for decades, and his internal control was absolute. There's that story from the 1988 Bush campaign.
Right, where he supposedly flipped a table.
Flipped a conference table, yeah, and physically threatened to kill a campaign staffer who had the nerve to question his expense reports.
While his own compensation was deliberately obscure.
Paid out in a lot of different ways, making it hard to track. It speaks volumes about the expectation of total obedience, built on a mix of fear and opaque rewards.
And this use of media for narrative control, it has historical precedent, too. William Randolph Hearst in the 1930s.
Hearst used his vast newspaper empire to openly support some of Hitler's policies in the mid-30s, particularly German rearmament. Now, the sources suggest his motive wasn't necessarily ideological alignment for war, but rather he wanted to encourage his editors to write editorials defending Germany's actions, publishing them under their own names.
So using his power to push a specific editorial line down through his own organization.
Exactly. Manipulating the narrative to fit his vision, forcing his editors to carry the water for it.
Finally, even these powerful figures face the issue of succession. The dynasty has to continue, sometimes even if it means disrupting the founder's control.
Yeah, the survival of the structure, the wealth, often requires the patriarch to eventually step aside, willingly or not. The Rockefeller transition is interesting here.
Don D. Rockefeller Jr. and his sons.
Right. When Junior's sons came back from World War II, they basically staged a quiet coup. They pushed out the old guard, the advisors who had served their father for decades. They deliberately set about changing the family's focus, its public identity. It forced Junior to scale back his own direct involvement, to step gracefully into the background, as the sources put it.
Which must have been hard for him.
Initially, yes, he was disturbed by it. But ultimately, the sources note, he saw their willingness to take charge, to shoulder the immense responsibility, as the fulfillment of his own hopes for the family legacy.
So the structure, the foundation, endured even as the founder's personal power was intentionally reduced by the next generation.
It shows the resilience of the accumulated wealth itself, but contrast that with the earlier, maybe more brutal era of Cornelius Vanderbilt, his view of his own son.
The Commodore. Yeah, he was famously harsh.
His assessment of his son, Cornel, was blunt. He's a very smart fellow, but he has a cog out.
A cog out, meaning
Something's fundamentally wrong, unreliable. And apparently Vanderbilt said this about almost every man he knew.
seriously.
Yeah. It reflects that incredibly harsh, competitive world he operated in. To build and maintain that kind of power in the 19th century, you couldn't fully trust anyone, not even your own heir. Everyone was flawed, everyone was competition.
Hashtag outro.
Wow. Okay, so this has been a really extensive deep dive. We've gone from passive income like Carnegie's to the speed games of HFT, the structural power of AI monopolies, the crafting of personas like Ford and Walton, the weaponization of political networks like the kooks, the regulatory capture scene with Purdue and in Russia. It's a complex picture, but the pattern seems clear. Finding ways, structural, personal, political, to accumulate vast wealth and then operate outside or even manipulate the normal systems of accountability and law. And what really connects all these threads fundamentally is that economic principle we touched on, accumulating capital faster than the overall economy grows. We have to come back to Thomas Piketty's analysis here. That core relationship between R, the rate of return on capital, and G, the rate of economic growth.
Right, Piketty's point that even small changes in growth rates can massively impact how wealth is distributed.
Exactly. He shows that if the overall economic growth rate slows down, say, from 2% a year to 1%, the capital to income ratio in society can potentially double.
Meaning people who already own capital, the Carnegies, the Kochs, the modern equivalents, see their share of the total economic pie grow much, much faster than everyone else who relies on wages from labor. It's an engine for accelerating wealth concentration.
And Piketty, along with other sources, makes this crucial historical point. The 20th century, when inequality actually decreased for a while in many Western countries, might have been an anomaly. It was an unprecedented and possibly unique character era, largely because wealth concentration was violently interrupted by huge external shocks.
World wars,
the Great Depression, other catastrophes, and crucially, the political response afterwards. Very high taxes on income, corporate profits, and especially on inherited wealth.
Without those massive shocks and high taxes, the argument goes, the natural tendency of capitalism is towards ever-increasing concentration of wealth, which is what we seem to be seeing again now.
That seems to be the trend the data suggests is reasserting itself.
Okay, so that brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. to consider. If history suggests that these extreme concentrations of wealth were really only kept in check or reversed by those massive disruptions, wars, catastrophes, and very high taxes on capital, and given everything we've discussed today about how modern power is accelerating through structural loopholes, things like HFT, potential AI monopolies, sophisticated political influence networks, narrative control, what kind of structural mechanisms, maybe going beyond just taxation, might be needed in the 21st century to address this record-breaking and apparently still accelerating consolidation of wealth and systemic power? What does the solution even look like in this new landscape?